In this particular case study, we are talking about a healthcare organization that had a few hundred employees. They were growing rapidly over the past few years. I'm going to keep it anonymous, so I'm not going to tell you a ton of details that might allow you to identify them, but they had been growing extremely rapidly and they had a problem, right? And so this problem, tell me if this sounds familiar. I'm going to give you a few quotes that they told us as we began talking to them. Number one, competing priorities are weighing on our team. We need to become more organized and cohesive. Number two, we need to transition into a more predictive organization from a reactive organization, right? So be more predictive and not reactive. Number three, we have silos of information across the company. We need to break down these silos. Number four, senior leadership needs visibility into organizational projects, portfolios, scopes, budgets, and schedules. We have too many things going on and not enough insight into where they are and whether or not they're being successful, right? So I would imagine for a lot of you, those types of quotes or those problems sound relatively common, right? That's a place that you start and you have some challenges associated with really understand how to prioritize, resource, and execute the projects inside of an organization. This comes down to project management, right? And so I want to give a definition of project management as we start to talk about this because project management is a term that I feel like people throw around in a lot of different areas. And so I want to make sure that when we say project management, at least for the sake of this conversation, we're talking about the same thing. So according to the Project Management Institute, PMI, who does PMP, Project Management Professional Certifications, project management is the use of specific knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to deliver something of value to people. It provides a predictable framework to support how your organization pursues specific initiatives. Now, a project can look slightly different depending on where you are as an organization, but that definition helps us kind of wrap our heads around what project management is, which means we have a predictable framework to pursue specific initiatives. We are using specific knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to drive value for the organization, right? So that is the place where we're starting from a definition, right? So for this organization, self-care organization that we were working with, the first thing that we had to do when we talk about how we can kind of bring this whole environment under control is we have to first define what we're talking about. So for this organization, what was a project, right? We had to sit down and define what a project is. And so in this instance, we defined a project for Anonymous Healthcare Group as something that has a defined start and stop point, something that has a scope, a schedule, and a budget, something that has an executive champion, somebody who on the executive team is championing this effort. It must have a project manager, somebody who is leading the project and driving it towards completion. It must have project support resources that can mean technical or operational talent to help execute on the project. And it must have a specific and measurable desired outcome, meaning we are doing this for a specific reason. We are going to drive it forward to accomplish this end, right? So that is what a project is at this anonymous healthcare organization, right? And so I started with kind of the quotes that they gave us. Competing priorities are weighing on the team. We're not getting anything done because there's too many things going on. We don't have visibility into how any of these things are going, right? Essentially, what they needed was a mechanism through which to prioritize, resource, and execute on the projects, which we just defined what a project is. But they needed to be able to prioritize, staff, and execute on the projects inside of the organization, right? And so as we talked to them and we worked through this definition, we drove them towards the solution of building a PMO office or a project management office. A project management office is a structure inside of an organization that is made to support the execution of projects. So what exactly does that mean? Well, projects in almost every organization, regardless of how you define them, inside of that organization have three primary constraints to execute them. Number one is the scope. So, what is the scope of what we are actually doing? Number two is the budget. What amount of capital do we expect to spend to execute this project? You can also branch a little bit into the human capital element of how much time of our own resources do we expect to be taken up by executing on this project. And then the third piece of that is the schedule. So what is the time frame in which we anticipate accomplishing this project? All of these components affect the quality of a project, and how well you manage all of these components impacts how successful a project is. You cannot move one of these constraints once you have started a project without moving at least the other one. So what does that mean? If you want to expand the scope, you can't expand the scope unless you extend the time frame or unless you increase the budget, right? If you want to decrease the budget, you cannot do that unless you decrease the scope or expand the schedule, right? They all work in conjunction to make the project executable. So you have to adjust two at a time. You cannot just change one without impacting one of the other ones. So once you understand these primary constraints of a project, that leads into why we should build a project management office. Because a project management office gives us a structured entity that helps with delivering enhanced efficiency of execution of project, the proper prioritization of projects instead of kind of a first come, first serve internal competition for resources. It allows for resource utilization based on what is most valuable to the team. It also allows for the leadership team to have insight into all the initiatives on the table and build strategic insight into that. And it's going to allow you to execute more effectively on your projects from a budgetary perspective. So you're not spending more money to execute on these, right? And so what we worked with Anonymous Healthcare Group to do was understanding their pain, understanding how they defined a project inside of their organization. We drove towards the build out of a project management office inside of the organization for those reasons. Now, there are 5 functional components of a project management office. Number 1 is intake. How do we intake new projects and initiatives that people want to undergo, right? How do we get them into the pipeline of projects and initiatives that is then reviewed by the PMO office? Number 2 is prioritization. Once we have a queue of projects that has been built through the intake process, how do we prioritize them? What is our mechanism for making decisions about the prioritization of the things that we are going to do? Third component of the PMO is implementation. How do we actually execute the implementation of each project? Again, a project is something that we are going to do driving towards a specific result. How do we execute that? That's the implementation portion of a project management office. Fourth component of a project management office is change management. We are making an organizational change. How do we manage and communicate that change out to the organization so that we effectively adopt that change and it drives actual value? And then the fifth and final component of the project management office is results measurement. Again, a project is something that we are doing to drive towards a specific outcome. So, how do we measure that? How do we measure that we were in fact successful inside of this project? That is the question that is answered through the results measurement function of a PMO office. And so, the criteria of success for this project that we worked on with Anonymous Healthcare Group was we wanted to implement a scalable best practice project management office that included an intake process, prioritization metrics, a project management playbook, resource utilization and management, a results measurement framework, and change management functionality. In doing so, we focused on a roughly 6-month time frame, right? Where we would spend the first couple of weeks getting familiar with the organization. So we had a number of stakeholder conversations and interviews to really understand what was going on there. Secondly, we took the next 2 months to build out an Asana environment to use Asana as the project management tool to facilitate the process for project management inside of the organization. Now, remember, technologies are just a tool. So the Asana implementation is not the end all be all for this project, but what it was is it was the tool to facilitate how the PMO office was going to work, right? And so we started in Asana by building out the intake process. So building workflows inside of Asana that allowed people to submit new projects with submission forms that would then go into a queue, and that would create a consistent intake process. From there, for the next roughly 3 months, we built out the Asana environment for the workflows inside of the PMO office. How will we execute on the projects? So we built out project frameworks and templates like project charters that were embedded in Asana and the natural workflows and statusing of the Asana environment setup, which allowed all the templates for project artifacts like a charter, like meeting minutes, all to be embedded inside of the Asana environment so that as a project manager works through a project, they can choose a project template that'll populate an initial project schedule. All of the deliverables and milestones inside of that project schedule will have embedded templates for all of the artifacts that you have to complete inside of each one of those things. So this whole process allows us to take the project management process that Anonymous Health Group wanted to follow and put it into Asana workflows to expedite the efficiency of their project managers so that when they get assigned a project, they can start with a pre-built project schedule, project templates, project artifacts, and they can get rolling right from there. After we had that in place, we spent the last roughly 2 to 3 months building out the results measurement function, which is how do we track the KPIs for each individual projects and wrap those into a dashboard and report back to the PMO and the executive team about how successful these projects and initiatives are. So we did that by combining Asana, and with a certain Asana licensing level, it has a Power BI integration, which allows us to track key performance metrics inside of Asana and then connect it to Power BI and build project management office dashboards for the actual results delivered on a project by project basis.